Mr Chair, I probably can't do any better than my colleague Mr Nash in his summation of the broken, but I'll give it a go anyway. The broken promises bill. You could also call this bill the Mark Bryers I'm getting $1,000 a week after I finish my 75 hours community service bill. Because as I said last night, even to the maestro who sits in the back row, that Mark Bryers, the biggest crook in the blue chip scandal, of course, after he finishes his 75 hours community service, gets a lovely little letter from John Key because he earns over $1 million a year. Thanks, do not pass go, and in Mark Bryers' case, do not go to jail. Do 75 hours community service, and you'll get $1,000 a week in tax cut from Mr Key. So, sir, as a reward. So we could call it the Mark Bryers Thanks for Coming Bill. We could call it that. We could also then reflect on the fact that as Mark Bryers gets his $1,000 a week because he earns $1 million a year, that every other person on the average wage, of course, is worse off when they take their meagre tax cut, flick on the GST, and then are exposed to 5.9% inflation. And, pardon? Sorry? Oh, no, well, see that member over there, the great maestro, the man who did such a wonderful job in Mount Albert, that his name as a tactician is mud. Is mud. That man is so good. I wish I was half as good as that member thinks he is. That's what I'd say. Because you see, even in that member's electorate, what is that member's electorate? I can't. Northcote. There's about 70-odd% or 60-odd% of his electorate which on the average, which are below $40,000 a year, and therefore, plus GST, plus 5.9% inflation, are worse off. So the great maestro, I'm sure, is going to organise one of those wonderful public meetings that he tried to organise in Mount Albert in a telephone box or a portaloo, and get the 67-odd% of his electorate who are worse off, and I invite him to explain and maybe hold up the bill and say, I broke my promises bill, and explain to those members of his electorate, those of his constituents who remember his name, why it is he broke the promise on GST, why it is he broke the promise on the super fund, why it is that he comes in the House and says, we're here to encourage savings, but he kicked the living daylights out of KiwiSaver and never told his constituents that, and why he said before the election, we will not borrow for tax cuts, yet under this scenario, in the budget documents, $240 million per week being borrowed for 3 years, and the financing costs don't even start to track down till 2021. So I say to the great maestro that there's a couple of political problems that he might want to exercise his mind around, given the hopeless job that he did in Mount Albert. So this could be called the Broken Promises Bill, as my colleague Mr Nash said, because there will be people reflecting on this tonight, and we know that they had a big breakfast over there this morning, and we know that they puffed their chests out when they read a few headlines, and we know, of course, that they go around gloating that a poll on close-up said 80%. Well, I'll tell you, we've all been there, haven't we, after the budgets? We've all been there. We've seen these wonderful polls. And what the people do is the people take a little bit of time to work through some of the malarkey the media put through and some of the spin from the National Party, and then the people in our communities get the calculators out. And they work out that the government's given them a few dollars here, but the pile of GST receipts on a Friday from the grocery store has gone up a bit, and then they work out that the price of vegetables, the price of meat, the school fees, the car insurance, everything has gone up, the electricity bill, education has gone up by 5.9%, and then they work out, of course, that's called inflation, I say to the maestro, then they work out, of course, that the National Party giveth with one hand and grab all of it back and then some with the other. And I say if the great maestro thinks that his constituents are silly and that they can't work the calculator or maybe if he wants to pull the smoke screen down over their eyes, as he's wont to do from time to time with the odd cigar, as we know, that he may actually, he will treat those people with disrespect. Because this is, sir, the title of this bill is quite rightly, more appropriately called the Broken Promises Bill, sir. And I will go on to say this, that if... No danger of that. No danger at all. No danger at all of that, I say to him. But you see, But, Mr Chair.
I call Clayton Cosby.
Thank you, Mr Chair. But you see, take it. Well, that's a good point, actually. Mr Prasad says take a call. Rather than sitting there barracking from the sidelines, maybe he could stand on a street corner in his electorate and hold up a sign that says, I ripped off and sold out 60 to 70% of my electorate. What do you reckon? He could do that. Maybe he could say sorry. But he sort of giggles and laughs. He's got Judith Collins-itis, grinning away like a Cheshire cat. But I say this, as the weeks and days go on, and the men and women in this country, the battling families, examine this bill, sir, as they examine it for what it is, as they examine the fact that it's going to cost them an extra $25 a week because of the $400 million cut out of ECE. They pile that on top of the GST increase. Then they pile, of course, the inflation on top of it. Then we won't even talk about, because it wouldn't be appropriate, the ACC levy increases, the car registration, and all the other taxes that have been piled off. And then, as my colleague Mr Shearer, he's the one, I say to the great maestro, who thrashed the living daylights, by the way, out of your candidate that you managed so well. As Mr Shearer said, of course, then there's this thing called interest rates. And Dr Bollard, of course, will look through the GST 2.5% increase, but he will not be able to look through the added 4% when you make the calculations that makes up the 5.9% inflation increase. And what does that mean? Well, there's a big thing, and Mr Foss said, some members over this side are going to pay their mortgage off with their tax cut. Well, I say to Mr Foss, you know, here, the man who's an economic genius, I suspect that most New Zealanders might look and say, I will apply that. I'm talking about the sort of 20 or 30% on the top they're actually going to get, or even less get something, that they might try and pay down their debt and their mortgage. But for the vast majority of people, of course, will be exposed to an increase in interest rates. And I say to that member, will he go to his constituents and explain, because of a 5.9% inflation rate, what interest rates he says? Well, maybe we should explain the policy targets agreement to that member. Maybe we should explain that the Governor of the Reserve Bank, given a 5.9% inflation forecast, is going to have to lift interest rates to get that back within the target range. But Mr Foss says Dr Bollard is wrong. Everybody is wrong except Mr Foss. The chairman is not wrong. I would never say the chairman is wrong. He's the chairman. I say this. So you add the mortgage interest up, you add the inflation and the cost adjustment and the cost of living, you add the GST up. Oh, they're very vocal now. But I say to Mr Foss, if he's so vocal, hold a public meeting. Hold a public meeting. Oh no, he laughs. He won't front up. He won't front up to his constituents. Oh no. If you're so good, and he's got such a gift of the gab, sir, take this that we call the Broken Promises Bill, have a public meeting in his patch, fill the hall with people from the various tax brackets that he's put in place in this legislation, and let's hear an explanation. And in Nelson, oh yes, oh goodness gracious, I forgot the Minister of ACC or whatever the heck he's called, in Nelson. Let's have a look at Nelson, because Nelson's interesting. In Nelson, 76% of Nick Smith's electorate earn under $40,000 a year. 76%. And as he parks his little car in Nelson Airport, as he does, and as he rolls into Nelson Airport tonight, I wager that one or two people on the aircraft might want to ask him, Dr Smith, you're our MP. Why is it that I'm worse off? Because I'm one of the 76% who are worse off thanks to that member and his government. But oh no, you won't get Nick actually fronting up to his constituents. So I challenge him. I challenge that member. This is the Broken Promises Bill, sir. I challenge that member to hold a public meeting and get some people, ring them up, get the 76% who earn under $40,000, sir. Get them in. He's better off. No, they're not. No, they're not. Just like Mr Smith cannot do the calculations on ACC, he can't do a decent tax analysis or a decent tax calculation. So I say to him, hold the public meetings. We'll be there. It's his last term, all right. We will be there. And if the National Party do not make the explanations, we are quite happy to do it on their behalf. 76% of Nelsonians As we speak, when this piece of legislation commences,